In this lesson video, we will discuss the basic techniques of printing in Excel. We will use the same file as the previous lesson, but you can also use your own if you wish. To print, you can open the File menu. Then select the print category here. The print screen will open. Or, if you prefer a shortcut, you can also press Ctrl P. This will also open the same print screen as before. In this screen, you can adjust various settings related to the printing process. On the left side, you can find the parameters. And on the right side, you can see the preview. This is how the result on paper will look like if you perform printing. Let's first discuss the various parameters on the left side. This large print button is the button you press to perform printing. But you don't want to press this button unless you are sure that all the parameters below are correct and the preview is showing the result that you expected. So, this will be the last button you want to press. Then, the copies parameter here determines how many times you want to print. Note that this value is different from the number of pages. Suppose you have 6 pages, and the copies value is set to 1. Then the printer will print 6 sheets of paper. But if you set this to 10, for example, then Excel will print all 6 of these pages 10 times. Meaning, there will be a total of 60 sheets of paper produced by the printer. Then, in this printer drop-down list, you can choose which printer you want to use. Excel relies on the operating system to identify the available printers. I currently own an Epson L3-150 printer connected wirelessly via Wi-Fi. The printers that you can use will have the label ready. Meanwhile, printers that are currently inactive will have the label offline. For printing, you can only use printers with the label ready. Apart from physical printers, there are also non-physical printers. Or in other words, they are just software. For example, this PDF option. Instead of printing the document to paper, this option will export it as a PDF file. Now, if you have a physical printer, usually the printer manufacturers, besides providing drivers, also provide special software to manage various aspects of your printer. If you want to access the printer software, you can press the Printer Properties button. So, here is the printer properties software of the Epson L3-150 that I currently use. Again, the UI that appears will depend on the type of printer you are using. If you use a different printer product, then of course, what you will see here is different. The main parameters of printing are in this Settings section. In this drop-down list, you can specify whether you want to print only the currently active worksheet, or all the worksheets in the workbook, or just data from cells that are currently selected. We will discuss selective printing in more depth in the next lesson. Next up is the Pages parameter. This parameter specifies the page range that you want to print, from what page to what page. By default, if we left this blank, all the pages listed in this preview will be printed. If we input here 2, and here 4, for example, then only pages 2, 3, and 4 will be printed. Then, the cladded parameter is useful when you are printing more than one copy. If we have 6 pages like this, for example, the cladded option will print pages 1 to 6 first for the first copy, then print again 1 to 6 for the second copy, and so on. Meanwhile, the uncladded option will print page 1 several times based on the number of copies. Only then the second page will be printed for multiple copies, then page 3, and so on. The next parameter is orientation. The portrait option means the content will be printed with vertical orientation. This is the default orientation. If we choose landscape, then the content will be printed horizontally. You can see that the changes on the left side will be reflected directly on the preview on the right side. For now, I am returning this to portrait mode. Next is the paper size. If you change the paper size here, for example, if I set this to A3, before We needed 6 pages to print the entire document. But because A3 is a bigger size, now we only need 2 pages. If I change the paper size to A4, for example, then set the orientation to landscape, we can see that the page count turns to 4. Essentially, what I want to show you here is that the parameters you set on the left side will affect the number of pages that will be printed. I am returning all of these to the default. You need to remember that the changes on these printing parameters are not recorded in the undo history. This means you cannot press Ctrl Z to revert the settings. Next is the margin parameter. Margin is the blank spaces or gaps from the edge of the paper to the printed content. This normal option is the default margin size. This wide option will give you a larger empty space. And lastly, this narrow option will give you very little empty space on the edges of the paper. If you want to use a custom margin size, you can select custom margins here. You can type in how much the margin is for the top, right, bottom, and left. You can also adjust the spacing for the header and footer. We will cover the header and footer later in the upcoming lesson. What we need to pay attention to now are these 2 checkboxes. This option is useful for centering the printed content horizontally, and this option is for centering in a vertical direction. Let me set this back to normal. Next is scaling. We use this parameter to change the content size to fit the paper. The option No Scaling means the content will be printed as is, without any scaling process. In this case, if the content is larger than the paper size, Excel will cut it and print it on the next sheet of paper. For example, our table actually has 9 columns, but what is printed on this page is only 6 columns. If we click the Next Page button, on page 4, we can see the remaining 3 columns on this page and the pages after this. Then, the option Fit Sheet on one page will compress all content into a single page of the active paper size. If you have a lot of data on your worksheet and you have a small paper size, you may not be able to read the printouts. The next option is Fit All Columns. This option will scale the entire content based on the width. Essentially, Excel will make the content or the table width to fit into the width of the paper. The last option is Fit All Rows on one page. This option is somewhat similar to the previous one, except that it is not based on the width, but rather on the height or the number of rows. In other words, Excel will scale the content or the table size so that all the rows fit on a single piece of paper. If you wish to adjust the scaling manually, you can click on the Custom Scaling Options button here. Or you can also click on the Page Setup button. Activate the Adjust To option and just enter the scale value you want to use in this field. For example, 50% or 75% and so on. Now we will discuss the various features available in a preview area on the right. If you want to navigate from one page to another, apart from using these arrows, you can also use the mouse scroll wheel. If you have hundreds of pages and you want to jump to a specific page quickly, you can just type in the page number into this box, or you can also drag the scroll bar at the right. Then, the rightmost button below can be used to zoom automatically so that the full page preview is visible on the screen. By default, this toggle button is active. So, if you click it, it will become inactive, thus making the print preview looks cropped. Let's click on it again so we can see the full page preview. The last one is the Show Margins button. When this is active, you will be able to see all margin lines. And not only that, you can even see the guidelines for the top margin, bottom margin, and even columns that are in the table. If you want to adjust the margin for the header, for example, just drag this line up or down. If you want to adjust the left margin, just drag this line left or right, etc. However, you need to be extra careful with these guidelines. Why? Because if you adjust them here, the changes are permanent, and they will also affect the settings in the worksheet view. Just for example, if I drag the size of the first column to be very wide, then click this back arrow button, we can see that the width of this column has been changed, just as we see it in a print preview screen. So, this is something you need to be aware of when working on a print preview screen.